This morning, if you'd like to start turning in your Bibles to Judges chapter 6, it's going to be more of a textual study this morning, kind of, I guess, about two chapters here in Judges, 6, 7, and 8. I guess a thought to think about, I was looking at this and starting to go through the Bible reading and just listening through Judges as I was driving down the road. Becky and I took a quick trip, took Thursday off, and went and found some wood someplace and left our cell phones on the tables and just enjoyed nature. But before that, I had to take the puppy dog to the vet. And so I was just listening to Judges, and just something about Gideon caught my attention. So turned into our sermon this morning. So think about a person in your life that perhaps is even over us, a supervisor, a boss. Maybe you are the boss. And what kind of a leader do we want this person to be? The book of Judges is about leadership. It's about some of the nation of Israel after the time of Joshua. So after the exodus from Egypt, after the wanderings in the wilderness, and after Moses has passed the gauntlet down to Joshua. He was leader of the nation for a while, and then eventually, as in all things, everyone dies. And so the judges come after the time of Joshua. So kind of the history marker for us there. And as we look at each judge, they are brought up by God. They are selected by God to deliver the people from the oppression that they have found themselves in. An interesting study I wanted to come up with is to look deeper at the book of Judges and really look at the ups and downs. And they were either ups or downs. And because we see throughout the wording of each chapter how they were righteous in God's sight. And then Joshua died, and all the elders that were with him died, and no one knew the Lord, and they went down. They went into immediately started looking at the idols around them and the gods around them, and they were in oppression and persecuted. They were put into slavery at times and different times, and then a judge would come up and bring them back up to God into righteousness for a time, and then that judge would die, and they would immediately fall back down again. We are now at the fourth time of being picked up with Gideon. So Gideon comes along as part of the fourth oppression of Israel after the death of Joshua. And in Gideon is I've titled this one, The Character of Gideon, because as we start to look at this first section here, Gideon was selected by God in Judges chapter 6. And that's what we look at throughout this chapter. And it's interesting to see the perspective. When you look at yourself in the mirror, what do you see? How would you characterize yourself? Then you ask a loved one, how would you characterize me? Do you get the same answer? It's quite interesting how harsh we are on ourselves for how critical we can be and how we don't see ourselves at our fullest potential. But yet someone else sees such greatness in us. They see such potential. Why do you keep spending time with me? I keep getting this wrong. Hopefully the answer is, I think you're about to get it right, and you will be a very good asset after that. Hopefully as an employer, they see that greatness, or at least the great potential within us, and it just takes something to open it up. So we see some of this in Gideon. At least I have, and maybe we all will at the end of this. But as we look through Judges chapter 6, we see in verse 12, and the angel of the Lord appeared unto Gideon, and said, The Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor. So that is the description that God has for Gideon, a mighty man of valor. So if we look at the definition of those, I've got those in the parentheses on the outline. The mighty part is great and superior in definition. And the valor is a boldness or determination in facing great danger. Also looked at as for boldness and determination in danger or war. So Gideon is being described as a great boldness or superior determination. Think of that for your own life. But why does Gideon think is this right for me? Is this the right definition? We look at him in let's continue in verses 13 through 17. And Gideon said unto him, O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why is all of this befallen us? And where be all these miracles which our fathers told us of, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But that the Lord now forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites? And the curiosity here is looking at Gideon even saying these words, because each time we see the nation fall, they knew not the God of the fathers. They knew not the things that had happened. It's like every generation would completely forget its history. I kind of relate to that a little bit. Growing up in school, probably the worst teacher for me was the history teacher. Not that I didn't like the history teacher, I just didn't care for the subject. Science, okay, I vaguely cared about that one. I could see sometimes where it applied if they made it interesting enough for me. If there were a couple that did not, they were a little less energetic. But we also, math, okay, I've got to balance my checkbook and know how much money I can spend, so I get portions of it, but don't confuse me with all this extra weird stuff. But the history, why do I need to know about history? I'm moving forward. And as a kid, I never fully understood that. Now, looking at it, and especially looking at the studies, looking at, as we do in the morning, the book of Revelation right now, as we look at the chapters of worldliness on Wednesday nights, there's a pattern that is formed throughout the years. There's a theme that we see about overcoming our past. How can we overcome the past if we don't know it? Apparently, Gideon knows the past. He is aware of it, which is probably unusual in this time because of all of the oppression and how quickly everyone just runs away from God and goes right back to the idols every time the last judge went away. So here, Gideon is like, what has happened? If you are an angel of the Lord, you are with the Lord. Where is he? We are here. We are his people. We have come out of the Egyptian bondage. We have come through all these. We have seen the miracles in our past. What about now? With that boldness, with that valor that he has, this fire within him, I think this is where we get our next verse in verse 14. And the Lord looked upon him and said, Go in thy might, and thou shalt save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent thee? Gideon is a mighty man of valor in God's eye. One reason for it is his heart. Look at the focus that he has about, Lord, where are you right now? We have heard of you. We know of you. At least Gideon does. Maybe the people around have forgotten him. They have gone past the idea of what they're supposed to be doing, have gone astray, and now they're under the oppression of the Midianites. But because of that, he gets this focus. We look at his character as we look forward to it. He asks those pertinent questions. He continues on as we look at this. That was his first question to the angel. Where have you been? Where has God been? So go, and have I not sent you? And now he's looking back in the mirror. He's not looking through God's eyes. He's looking through Gideon's eyes at himself. And he says in verse 15, And he said unto him, O my Lord, wherewith shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. He's the younger brother. He is in a poor family. He is not a man of great prominence. But look at something else to look at as we go through this. Who is doing what action? Verse 14, God said, for the angel of the Lord said, have I sent thee? God, the Lord, has sent thee. Verse 15, and he says, how shall I, Gideon, save these people? For I, Gideon, am the least in my father's house. That'll change as we go forward. But for now, he's like, how am I going to do this? And the Lord said to him, surely I, the Lord, will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man. First off, you don't go to battle with one person expecting to conquer an whole army. But yet he says it will be done, because I, the Lord, will be with thee. And he said unto him, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then show me a sign that thou talkest with me. So he looks at this idea, and we will continue here in a second, but look at the pertinent questions that he asks. He doesn't just kind of stumble and fumble. He doesn't run away and hide. He doesn't take and confront. The might and valor, the boldness, the great superiority, the good questions that he has for God. How shall I do this? The Lord said, I will be with thee. I am the least in my house. He also now looks at it. He's realizing what is going on. He's seeing what God sees a little bit. And now he is looking at it saying, if I have found grace in thy sight, show me a sign. So now he is starting to see this, but he wants that confirmation. He's not fully there yet. He wants that one little thing. And we see this a couple of times with Gideon. And this is something I think that is a very good character piece. And as we look forward, we hopefully will see this and review ourselves. Do we do this? He is rooted in the faith of God. After this conversation and assurance of God is with him, he gives an offering. So as we look forward to it, he says, let me find, if I have found grace, show me the sign. What is the sign that he's looking for? It starts in verse 18. He continues his sentence and says, depart not hence, I pray thee, until I come unto thee and bring forth a present and set it before thee. And he said, I will tarry until you come. He recognizes who he is talking to and that it is an angel of the Lord. And so this angel has come with the voice of the Lord. Let me bring something to you. A mighty man bringing a gift. You know, he's described as this man of might, of valor, but also with that, he has the right heart. He is bringing this gift, and Gideon went and made ready unleavened cakes, made ready a kid, unleavened cakes, and an ephah of flour. The flesh he put into a basket, and he put forth broth in a pot, and brought it out under the oak, and presented it. And the angel of God said to him, take the flesh and the unleavened cakes, and lay them upon this rock. Pour out the broth. And he did. Verse 21, and the angel of the Lord put forth the end of the staff, and it was in the hand, and he touched the flesh and of the unleavened cakes, and there rose up a fire from the rock, and consumed the flesh and the unleavened cakes. Then the angel of the Lord departed from his sight. And when Gideon perceived that he was an angel of the Lord, Gideon said, alas, O Lord God, for because I have seen an angel of the Lord face to face. And the Lord said unto him, peace be unto thee. Fear not, thou shalt not die. Then Gideon built an altar there unto the Lord, and called it Jehovah Shalom. Unto this day it is yet in Ophrah. Part of the greatness and the superiority of Gideon is the recognition of when to be humble, when to worship. And he sees this and does this a couple of times. This is our first occurrence of it, when he realized and verified this is an angel of the Lord. He didn't just say, oh, here it is. He verified it. He saw the signs. He gave his offering. It was accepted. And he worshiped. Not the angel, but he worshiped the Lord. And he received that back to him, that the Lord had said unto him, Peace be to thee. Not just being selected by God, but also selected, for his great and mighty valor. But think about the tactics he uses, or the strategy that he uses throughout his time. He uses one here during the, actually even before we started reading here, if we go backwards a little bit into verse 11, we even see where they're being oppressed by the Midianites. And there came an angel of the Lord and sat under the oak, which was in the Orpheum, that pertained unto Josiah the Abizarite, and his son Gideon threshed wheat by the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. So when the angel appeared, Gideon was threshing wheat by a winepress to hide it from the Midianites. One of his strategies, if they're going to eat, if they're going to be able to utilize this, if you're being oppressed by a superior nation, by this great number of people, and we're going to see great numbers here in a little bit, in order to have something for yourself, you don't do it out in the open. They just come and take it. He was doing this off to the side to try and have something, so to be hidden. So to have this idea, this the focus and thought to be able to do such a thing. We also see that when after where we're just at, when he made his offering to God, starting in verse 25, that he was commanded by the Lord after he worshipped. And it came to pass that same night that the Lord said unto him, Take thy father's young bullock, even the second bullock of the 7 years old, and throw down the altar of Baal that thy father hath, and cut down the grove that is by it. And then to build an altar unto the Lord thy God upon the top of this rock. You're in a nation that has devoted itself to Baal. Your own people have devoted themselves to Baal. Apparently your own father has a statue of Baal in your midst. As we look through this process and look at the verses below, I almost wonder if it's more of a thing, because where is this man's faith coming from? Where's Gideon's information from? I would assume he's being taught within his house, because he's not being taught in the temple. He's not being taught by those around him, at least not as likely. So he's probably getting it from home, but maybe that statue is there for the appearance of things and for, I don't know. But for whatever reason, his father has one, and God has just told him to go and tear it down. If I were to go destroy something of my dad's when I was a kid at home, I would not be happy afterwards. There are usually consequences that come from such. But this one here, he takes and thinks about this. He uses the tactic about it because in verse 27 it says, Then Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord has said unto him. And so, because he feared his father's household and the men of the city, that he could not do it by day, that he did it by night. God said go do it. He didn't say right this second. So he took and did it by night, using the strategy and thoughtfulness to not cause a major scene. It'll still cause a scene, and we see that as it continues forward. But yet it is one where he takes and thinks about his actions before he does them. He thought about being able to do the wheat. He thought about taking down, of how to take down the altar. He didn't do it by himself. He took 10 men. I wonder how he selected those 10. Do you know who is faithful to Baal, who is faithful to God? But he took them and went by night and completed the task. We also see his tactics as we move forward into the battle that is to come, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But as we go through, we also see that as he continues in this process, God tells him again that these people will be given to your hand. But in order to do that, if we skip ahead, I encourage you to continue to look through all of these the chapters here and see all the information there is. But the next verses talk about when the people awake, they notice that the Baal has fallen down. And they perceive that it was Gideon. So I'm guessing Gideon had a reputation of being a man of valor, being one of valor towards God and not towards Baal. Because they pointed him out pretty quick in the text. And his father said, let Baal contend for himself. Don't go after Gideon. If your God of Baal is so great and he's so distraught that his statue was taken down, let him put itself back up. Does that sound familiar from another scripture? We had that incident as well. Out of all the times that Baal has fallen down and never been able to pick himself back up, I wonder if there's ever a time that, I guess they didn't like history class either because they ignored that part of their history of worshiping Baal, who was just a statue that you had to put up. But we look ahead and we continue and see Gideon continue to seek verification and was not quick into action. When he's given something by God, he did not just run and do it. He sought a verification to make sure he was doing and understood correctly. If we look at verse 36, we see in chapter 6 still, and Gideon said unto God, if thou wilt save Israel by my hand, as thou hast said. So we see that this point of the Midianites and Amalekites and children of the east were gathered together in verse 33, and they went over and pitched in the valley of Jezreel. They have gathered their armies. And the Spirit of the Lord told Gideon that to do certain things and that these men will be given to him. And Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hand. Notice that these changed from earlier in chapter 6. In 6 it was, how will I do this? He sees the point. How will you, if you will do it by my hand, behold, I will put a fleece of wool on the floor, and if dew is on the fleece only, and dry on the earth, then I will know you will save Israel by my hand, as you said. And God did it. Notice the approach that Gideon brings. As a leader, how do we bring our approach to a problem? How do we ask a question without offending someone or just taking someone's word for it? How do we just verify something? He said, if this is to happen by the way you have said, show me this sign. God did. Verse 38, so it was so, he rose up on the morrow, and thus the fleece together, and wringed the dew out of it to fill a bowl of water. And verse 39, he asks one more time. What if someone heard me make that request and went and filled this up? I don't know. He said one more time, and Gideon said to God, let not thine anger be hot against me, and I will speak but this once. Let me prove, I pray thee, this once with the fleece. Let it now be dry on the fleece and wet on the ground with the dew. And we see God's response. And God so did that night. For it was dry upon the fleece only, and there was dew all upon the ground. The approach that Gideon brings to validating, and even the second time, okay, you did what I asked the first time, but one more time, please. Let your wrath not be against me. I'm not doubting you. I just want to verify, is the way I see Gideon looking at this. He wants to verify. He wants to make sure. Because who can do these things that have just happened? Where is what is the power that is available to God to do these things? Who else has that power? So if Gideon is trying to verify that this is from God and not a dream or not from a false prophet or not from some, he is asking very specific items in very specific ways. And doing it in such an open way that it is an inviting question. I am looking for this. I want to be pleasing unto you, Lord. Please verify it's you. And God was not offended by the request and complied every time. He also put forth another level of comfort to Gideon. As we go through the text and we start to see that they go over, Gideon brings his men out to start looking at the battle. We see he starts to get, in chapter 7, verse 9, another option from God. God said, and if you are afraid of these people, go down and take your servant with you if you would like, and listen to the enemy's camp. Listen to what they have to say. And so he goes down and listens, and he hears them talk about a dream that he had, and the interpretation that it must be Gideon. He's called by name. How does this army's camp know about Gideon coming to make war with them? But this entire camp knows of this and comes down and talk about it. And again, Gideon's character, his seeking validation from God, what does he do when he sees it? He took and worshipped. Verse 15 in chapter 7, and when it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and of the interpretation, that he worshipped. He returned to the host of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord has delivered into your hand the host of Midian. He worshipped. He validated it was God, and he worshipped him, just as he did when the angel came before him. And now he did it again when he sees that it is God doing these things. And he gives proper credit where credit is due. Isn't it always wonderful? Wonderful. You do all these great things and someone else takes all your credit? Or hopefully not the other way around, where everyone else does great things and you take the credit? He's giving the credit. He went back to the host of Israel and said, God has given them into our hands. He remembers where the focus is. We also get to see Gideon start to emerge here as a leader. We see the characteristics of his leadership. We see some leaders, especially in a great battle such as this. This is a huge number of people that he's about to go up against. We would think of a great general, a great military man, a greatness. Well, God gave him the title of a mighty man of valor. But we see his leadership in battle, in conflicts with his own kinsmen, and even as a leader of the nation, as we go from Judges chapters 7 and 8. In his leadership, he also knows to listen. A great sign of a great leader is the ability to listen to others. And this one especially, when you are leading the nation of Israel and picked by God, you might want to listen to God. And he did so. He listened to God to reduce from verses 1 through 8. He went from 32,000 men and said, if any of you are afraid, pack your bags and you may return home. No worries. You don't have to face this fear. And so a multitude left, and he was left with 10,000. And God said, no, you still have too many people, because the people will think they did this instead of allowing me to do it. So he went down to the water and decided, but based on how they drank the water, which ones to keep. And he was left with 300 men. He listened to God. A sign of a great leader is being able to listen and follow the commands. He also used his strategy with God instead of his strength. as we look at the battle that's to come, these great multitudes that are here is described as being a multitude without number, the sands, the star. It's almost like he's describing the prophecy to Abraham of how many kin he would have, of great numbers. Now in chapter 8, verse 10, it gives a little bit of math involved right there, but if you do the math, Gideon's 300 men go down and surround 135,000 people. About that, because it says that there was such a number and about this number in the next spot. So around 135,000 to 300. I don't bet, but I wouldn't bet on Gideon. I don't see there being very good odds in Gideon's favor right here from a human standpoint, from a strategy and tactic standpoint. 300 against 135,000? I don't even know what the ratio is. I didn't think to try and do that calculation, but it's more men than I want to take care of at one time. But it's not 300 men. It's 135,000 against 300 men with God. So he used his strategy to outdo that number. They took and made a precise ruckus around. They surrounded, broke into three groups, went around them. They had their trumpets, they had lanterns, and they had, I think it was vases or jars. At one time, they all did the same thing in unison. They broke their jars, they blew their trumpets, they yelled a war cry. So these men, these of numbers, were surrounded and hearing this from all sides. And the verses say they went after each other. And then the ones that remained took off. In all of the preparations of this battle, I never once saw a weapon mentioned for Gideon and his men. Now, I believe they had them, but Gideon never told them, get out this, raise your sword. None of that was mentioned. Great strategy in using, allowing God to work. After this great battle, all these men and everything got weeded down. The survivors are on the run. Some of his own kinsmen, some of the own nation of Israel came to Gideon and were upset with him. Started in chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. And the men of Ephraim said unto him, why have you done this to us? You called us not. Now these men just went and had their own battle and took over their own lands. And they did not weed down their armies like Gideon did. But they were successful in their areas. They now conquer and possess their spots. When thou wentst to fight with the Midianites, why didn't you call us? We are warriors. We want to come and fight. We'll come and do this. And they were very sharp about this. They were upset. And Gideon said to him, what have I done in comparison to you? Notice the reply. He doesn't just tell them because we didn't need you. God didn't tell me to get you. God told me to come with as few men as I could. No. He says, what have I done in comparison of you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? He's down here in this little lower area. You've got this great spot that you just conquered. Is not your area much better? And in verse 3, again, as a great leader gives credit, God delivered into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. And what was I able to do in comparison to you? As part of the fleeing, some of the men went into their area, and this is how they found out about him. Also, Gideon took and called as part of his strategy to call to these men for help to go and cut off the water supply along the path. So they found out about it, and they actually were able to kill these two princes. So they got the princes, they got the better land, and they're now being asked to take and cover some of the tactical advantage. Without water, there's only so far you're going to be able to run and be able to do so effectively. So based on the way he replied to this conflict, we see at the end of verse 3, then their anger was abashed or subsided towards him when he had said that. The way he responds and replies to men who are dealing quite harshly with him, he kept his cool and calm. As a leader, it is important to resolve conflicts as well. Another part is as the armies are still running, we're still chasing after these. Gideon is up in the front, taking lead. Another good point of a leader is a leader. He is leading his men. He is in front. He gets to these two cities and makes request to the men of the city. Give, I pray you, the men behind me bread, for they are weary. He's not just demanding it, but he's also adding, I pray you. It's a strong request, I'm sure. And the men of the city, with their arrogance, say, why? You're chasing after two kings that are running with their tails tucked between their legs. We saw it. They ran through a minute ago. You act as if you've already captured them. Okay, first, they're already on the run. Their numbers have dwindled greatly. Gideon knows that he is with God, and so he is asking these men, I pray you to give my men something, for they are weary. And the men of these two cities, both cities, act the same way. Why should we help you? You're not the king. You don't have them. They're still king. And even though the king is running away, scared, why should I help you? And he says he will return. So as he goes through all that process through there, he gets up to the men, he takes care of those kings, and he comes back. But notice how he deals with the city as well. So he gets the same reply in chapter 8, verses 5 and in 8 for each city. But the consequences to those cities come starting in verse 13. And Gideon, the son of Jopheth, returned from battle before the sun was up and caught a young man of Succoth, and inquired of him to the descriptions of the princes of Succoth and of the elders. And there were 77 men. So this young man was well informed of the city, knew about the leaders of the city, gave him all that information. Gideon didn't come back after war, walking through during the day. He came back early to gain information as well. Before making the next step, he makes a plan. So he thought about all this. He then asked this person about the city, about the princes and of the elders. Then he went into the city to the men, and he said, remember the men that you said, are they in your hand? And he took the elders of the city and the thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them he taught the men of Succoth. I'm getting this vision of, now, I did not grow up down here, so I never had to go get my own switch, and I did not have a switch used on me, but that's what I'm envisioning happening right here. Can you imagine having the elders of the city switched in front of everybody? And for the second city, he beat down the tower of Peniel and slew the men of the city. There were consequences to their actions. He was working for God, doing these things. He is going and taking the leaders and is taking up the leadership of the nation. And these men were quite defiant and arrogant against him. And by being arrogant against him, he recognized that as being arrogant against God. And there were consequences. But how did he do all this? He didn't just go in and just do things random. But he also knew in verse 22 and 23, as the men of the city took and were looking at him and saying, you need to be our leader. Then the men of Israel said unto Gideon, rule over us, both you and your sons and their sons also, for thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian. And Gideon knew who did what. Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, neither shall my sons rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. Who is the ruler? It wasn't Gideon. That mighty man of valor had recognition. He had that great or superiority and determination to follow and serve God, even as leader, as the least in his father's household to the leader of the people. Through his hand he led, and through his leading, verse 28, thus was Midian subdued before the children of Israel, so that they lifted up their heads no more. And the country was in quietness 40 years in the days of Gideon, because of Gideon's leadership, of allowing the Lord to lead through him. The land knew peace for 40 years. Gideon was recognized, both recognized and gave credit to the Lord in every situation as he went through his life here. That is why he is credited with such might and valor from God. It's not what we see in the mirror. It's what we see from God. We can have the same mighty valor given by Gideon today in our own lives. We can do that by following Acts 17:11. As Paul went from Thessalonica down to Bereans, now these were more noble than those in Thessalonica, that they received the word with all readiness of mind, examining the Scriptures daily, whether these things were so. How many times did they examine the Scriptures? How many times was it written? And they looked at it. Our speech and actions must be the same as like Gideon. He was a great and mighty leader, but yet look at how it was. As verses of the New Testament could describe him, with grace and seasoned with salt. Colossians 4:6, let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. How did he know how to answer the leaders of the cities that were dealing harshly with him versus his own kinsmen? He didn't answer them both the same. He used appropriateness in each one. 1 Peter 3:15, sanctifying your hearts, Christ as Lord, being ready always to give answer to every man that asks you a reason concerning the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear. But to do that, we also have to be ready and always giving an answer. And 2 Timothy 2:15, give diligence to present thyself approved to God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, handling right the word of truth. We too can have the same confidence, the same boldness and might and valor as Gideon. We are encouraged to do so. He is just but one example of how to do that. And through some of the different examples of what he has, hopefully we can see the different options that are there. Maybe we can take and help each other. I pray that we do and that we can. I pray that we can reach out using that might and meekness and servitude of the Lord. And as we do so, let's reach out to those round about us. We have a game night coming up this Saturday. Be bold and mighty. Reach out to somebody and invite them in. Invite them to a fellowship. Invite them in. Invite them tonight. We have a song service happening this evening with devotions. So please be ready for all of these things. If you need help in your path, if we need to help someone else, if you have needs of the congregation, let us know while together we stand and sing.